What are some psychology experiments with interesting results? White rats and black rats were raised separately without seeing each other. When a black rat was placed in the white rat's cage, the other rats ostracized him. When white and black rats are raised together and a new black rat is placed in a cage, the white rats accept him. So basically rats are racist. Unless raised to accept differences. I'm late but nobody has said it yet. The self-fulfilling prophecy studies are very important to social psychology and their findings have many real-world applications. Basically they brought together a group of kids and formed a class with a real teacher. They gave the kids a test for overall academic skill at the start of the course. But didn't really use the scores. Instead they told the teachers that a few students, picked at random, were very brilliant and scores very highly. They then observed the class for a long period of time and noticed that the teachers gave the kids they thought were brilliant much more attention. At the end of the study the kids took the test again. And they found that the kids who were randomly named brilliant at the start actually scores higher than the rest of the class. The kids, again, at the start didn't score any different from the rest of the class. But through the self-fulfilling prophecy they became the best in their class. This obviously has tons of application in the world and especially education. I've heard there is a similar process that happens in China with people born into the year of the dragon, predicted to be highly successful, etc. The monster experiment. Although it is horrible how they left the children with mental health issues at the end. This experiment gave very good insight to how to parent a child. On this experiment, they took groups of orphaned children and separated them into 3 groups. One was the control. The second were told they has a lips and were doing bad. And the third was told that their speech was perfect. As the experiment went on, Group 2 began developing lisps after being berated constantly. They became shy and reserved. They were scared to speak because they didn't want to get in trouble because of their poor speaking skills. Group 3, however, had the opposite happen. They talked better. They were more willing to improve. They were encouraged to keep speaking and told that their speech was amazing and perfect. By the end of the experiment, they had one group with no change, one group with now mentally ill children with a speech impediment, and one group with great speaking skills. It truly shows that encouraging children is the way to go and that verbal abuse can be just as, if not more, harmful as physical abuse. Can all parents be required to study this? Please. Not entirely sure it fits into the category, but the Rosenhan experiment. 13 people feigned mental illnesses to get into mental hospitals and all were admitted with different diagnoses. They then assumed their normal personalities, but to be released they all had to admit that they were mentally ill. There was a second part where a hospital challenged Rosenhan to send multiple fake patients to the hospital and they would rate their patients on a scale of whether they think they were faking. They identified many possible fakers. But Rosenhan in fact hadn't sent anyone. These are my favorite kind of studies. I love it when participants are given power and then lied to law. The Monopoly study by Paul Piff. He basically brought 2 strangers into the lab together and had them play a game of Monopoly together. He randomly assigned one participant to start the game with twice as much money than the other, and that participant also got to roll both dice to get around the board, i.e., the other participant started with half the money and could only roll 1 dice. At the end of the game, when he asked the participants who started with more money why he won the game, they would chalk it up to their excellent strategy and gamesmanship rather than the fact that they had started the game with way more resources. It says a lot about how we deal with being born into a privileged state. The 3 Christs of Ypsilanti. Psychologist forces 3 people who believe that they are Jesus Christ to live together. It does not go well. The psychologist, Milton Rokeach, had heard of a case where 2 women who believed that they were Mary, Mother of Christ, were forced to live together and one of them broke free from their delusion. So he figured, 3 Christs. What would happen? They were angry at each other. Often had physical fights. They eventually started getting along by avoiding the topic. He would ask them about the others and each would say that the others were crazy. That they, of course, were the real Jesus. No cures. Some unethical stuff. Interesting though. I was hoping to find this. The case study was in 1964. And they were all diagnosed with paranoid schizophrenia. They were all patients at Ypsilanti State Hospital. And while they didn't live together, they were in group therapy sessions. You can find the book on Amazon, and there was a movie adaptation as well. I'm a huge fan of Milgram's Small World experiment. It is more sociology than psychology. But I still think it is really cool. Milgram sends out 160 letters containing the name and address of a stockbroker in Boston to people in Omaha, Nebraska. They had to send it to someone they thought would get the letter closer. But they couldn't mail it directly to the stockbroker. Interestingly, most people that sent on the letter sent it on to the same group of people on the 5th degree. It only took 6 people, hence the 6 degrees of separation, to arrive. On average, it shows how interconnected our world is. Even before the internet. Which is happy to think about. If you stare into a dimly lit, i.e., candle-lit mirror for 10+ minutes, you start to see hallucinations. What individuals see tends to vary. But they've used this as a test to simulate schizophrenia before, because some see monsters, deformities, general weirdness. I did a variation of it for a mate at uni and completely wimped out of it. After my face started not looking like my face anymore, I had a complete dissociation. I stopped looking and just waited out the time. Now what I know I'm doing tonight. Edit, am I dyslexic? I loved learning about infant development. My favorite was probably the development of depth perception, or perhaps the fear of heights. We're not born with it, but, if I recall correctly, we develop it within the first year or so. Scientists created a raised square platform. Half of the floor was wood and the other glass. The actual surface of the floor, 1 meter or so below, was white with red polka dots. At varying intervals of age, the babies would be brought in and placed on the wood end and encouraged to crawl to their moms, who were standing at the glass end of the platform. In early infancy, baby crawls over there without giving a shit. At some point though, they stop at the point where the wood meets the glass, or plexiglass maybe, showing that they recognize the difference in height and the fear of falling. Babies' brains are pretty f***ing cool. The most fascinating part about these experiments was, for me, this fear of heights depends on the way infants move and has to be relearned once they switch from crawling to walking. More precisely, very young infants crawl over the edge, then learn to avoid it. Later, when they learned how to walk, they again walk over the edge, seemingly forgetting their fear of heights. Finally, they relearn it and avoid the edge while walking. 2. Reconsolidation. When you retrieve a memory from your long-term memory, it is susceptible to being manipulated. This can lead to memories being totally changed from the source. This is why eyewitness accounts cannot be fully seen as true. This knowledge is also being used to help people with PTSD by changing the negative memories they have of their particular trauma. You have been banned from Mandela effect. Could I just remember this wrong? No. The entire universe has changed. Quote, mice were put on 2 sides of a wall with a door in. Only the right mouse could open the door. Slowly, they filled the left mouse's room with water, and eventually, when right mouse saw them in danger, they opened the door. However, mice that had previously been on the left side and were now on the right, mice who had previously been wetted, opened the door considerably faster because they knew how unpleasant it was to be in the other scenario. Basically, mice have empathy. It's not that psychopaths lack empathy, but rather, they have the manual settings. A specific region of the brain lights up when people experience empathy. For most people, it's an automatic, subconscious response. But in a study where they showed emotional videos to psychopaths and while scanning their brains, psychopaths would only light that region of the brain when specifically asked to feel for the character, while the control participants would light up automatically. So, would it be possible to be some kind of benevolent psychopath? One who always or mostly chooses to empathize? I just recently heard of blind-sightedness during one of my cognitive psychology classes. Basically, the area of the brain that processes what our eyes see is located at the back of the head. Just where your skull starts to get smaller. Towards your neck. Because of this, if you hit your head back there, quite often everything will go black for a moment before sight returns again. Sometimes though, following severe trauma to this area of the brain, like after falling off a ladder onto a curb or something, a person is never able to see again. For a long time it was assumed that the eyes were somehow incapable of seeing following the trauma, and that was why people were blind. However, it's been shown that it is just the processing of the images that is damaged. In other words, your eyes are still working away. Viewing images but your brain is unable to process the images so you can't see them. Some experiments looking into this have found that people with damage to this area can still navigate around things in front of them without realizing they are doing it. So if you told someone with this damage to walk down a corridor, and you placed obstacles in their way, they wouldn't be able to see the obstacles but they could avoid bumping into them because their eyes are still able to view them and send signals to other areas of the brain to avoid knocking things. This is known as blind-sightedness. Blew my little mind tbh. The car crash experiment. It demonstrated that the way investigators word a question has an immediate effect on the subject's memory of an event. It was part of a suite of studies by Elizabeth Loftus with various other co-researchers that began to call into question the veracity of eyewitness accounts. I took a class on human memory and let me tell you, we don't remember anything very well. One time I participated in a paid research experiment. I was basically tricked into thinking I was drunk. I was placed in a room with 2 other people and we were instructed to drink vodka with cranberry juice over a period of time while we socialized. After we drank, I was placed in a room where I had to read some flashing words on a computer. I felt pretty drunk at this point. When the researcher came back into the room, he gave me my car keys and said I was never actually given alcohol. He briefly told me that because I was anticipating drinking for this experiment that my brain had tricked me into feeling the effects of being intoxicated. I immediately snapped out of it and was completely amazed at how I felt. Solomon Asch's experiment on conformity. He set up a test wherein he would show 3 lines of different lengths to 5 or 6 individuals, I forgot the exact number, who had to state which line was the longest of the 3. The thing is, only the last individual is the participant and the others are actors paid to answer in a specific manner. For the first few questions, they choose the correct answer. But later on they start choosing the wrong one. The participants are conflicted as to whether they will say the correct answer or conform to the wrong answer as to not be judged by others or due to self-doubt of their own answers. In the end, most do conform. It's really interesting since it shows how powerful conformity is in the face of doubt. Up to a point that some even question their own sanity during the test. Another variation of the experiment also had interesting results. It had the same setup with 5 individuals with the last person being the participant. However, this time some of the actors say the wrong answer while one actor says the correct one. There was an increase in participants who would choose the correct answer and avoid conformity. It shows how much doubt one can have on oneself when alone, but be brought back to self-confidence when they find outside support. Aaron and Dutton, 1974, misattribution of arousal. Men who had just walked across bridge, either steady or unsteady, were approached by a female psychology student, posing to do a project on the effects of exposure to scenic attractions on creative expression. The men had to complete a questionnaire and write a short dramatic story about a picture she provided, and she gave them her phone number if they had more questions. Men who walked across the shaky bridge were more likely to call her up because they misattributed the arousal from the bridge to the woman. TLDR, watch a horror movie on the first date. Not a psychologist, but the one where given a choice between sitting down doing nothing and shocking oneself. People tend to choose the shock. Ergo, we would choose pain over boredom. Curiosity over boredom maybe? I don't know the name of it, but apparently 2 people become closer if they survive through something together. Not even actual surviving death scenarios, but anything that has you on your toes and heart racing. Like a roller coaster. Dunning-Kruger effect is one of my favorites. Basically, people with less expertise in a field will overestimate their abilities in the given field because they don't know enough to see the limits of their expertise. At the same time, experts tend to underestimate their abilities because they know too well what they don't know. The phenomenon has, among other factors, been linked to anti-vaxxers, who overestimate their expertise, not seeing what they don't know, with dire consequences. Or every online game ever.